Don't worry, Mom. I know all about cannibalism. I saw it on TV. See? It's okay. He saw it on the television. Doing my best Jack Nicholson impersonation that I can humanly do. Hello, huge movie fanatic Nate coming at you on a late March day in 2018. I'm coming at you to probably do my final for the season winter-related movie review. The Shining, which is of course based on the Stephen King book or novel. As I've said so many times in reviews past, I'm not a reader, I'm not a Stephen King fan. So this review will be strictly a review of the movie as it is, and it's kind of good in a way, me being a huge Stanley Kubrick fan, that maybe it's a plus that I never, read the book or saw that, what I would regard as probably lame TV movie they did that was based more on the book from what I understand years ago. But if memory serves, this was the second Stanley Kubrick movie I ever saw, the first being 2001: A Space Odyssey, and I think I saw that before I was 10 or maybe right around that time. I liked robots at the time, and my parents were like, ooh, you gotta see Hal. Of course, Hal not being so much of a robot as much as just a voice in the wall or whatever. Now I'm reviewing 2001. Anyway, trying to stay on track, this is the second Stanley Kubrick movie I think I saw, of course and I saw it at the age of 12, and of course being 12, I didn't read credits or really care who the hell made movies at the time, so I didn't know it was the same guy who did 2001: A Space Odyssey. But the reason I saw this when I was 12 is because that was the summer that the Batman movie with Jack Nicholson and Michael Keaton was in the theater, and of course everyone and all the kids and stuff loved Jack Nicholson's performance as the Joker, and I'm like, oh well, yeah, I like him as the Joker, and my dad was like, well here's another movie with Jack Nicholson that you should see. Where he's great in this as well, and that's what prompted the seeing of The Shining. So I saw The Shining for the very first time when I was 12, probably mid to late summer. And, obviously being a fan of, before the age of 10 or around the age of 10 and 11 and 12 of 2001: A Space Odyssey, I was not the kind of kid who needed constant action or constant whatever, so I instantly took to The Shining. I thought it was an absolutely fantastic movie when I saw it. Probably not for the same reasons I think it's an absolutely fantastic movie now, but I'm just trying to say that as a 12-year-old first seeing The Shining, I was instantly taken by it, and it's even at the tender age of 12, not necessarily knowing how masterful the movie was in terms of the technical way it was being made and the use of camera and editing and music and stuff. I probably subconsciously knew it. I mean, who wouldn't, So starting on the review of the movie, I love how the movie starts, which is basically an interview, which is a perfect way to introduce a character because we're basically seeing, I guess I should say before that, the opening of the movie with the fantastically classic at this time, amazingly steady camera, helicopter mounted camera shots and stuff going over the water, and all these wide angle lens shots of Jack Torrance's character driving up to the Overlook Hotel for the interview. Was an absolutely fantastic way to set the stage for the movie and set the tone with the really creepy music, and the opening credits was a great way to start the movie. Absolutely fantastic. I've seen this movie at least once on the big screen, and it was, it's really begs to be seen on as big a screen as you can. Of course now, having, projectors and big screen TVs now, you can get a better sense of that now at home. Which is really cool. You don't have to, not that you could really necessarily see this in a theater anymore because most theaters are digital unless they're projecting the Blu-ray, which of course you could do at home. But what I love about the beginning of the movie is introducing the character of Jack Torrance. Jack Nicholson's playing Jack Torrance in an interview. So we're basically seeing, getting the first impression of Jack as exactly how the employer, the guy who ended up hiring him for the job of caretaking the Overlook Hotel does. So we're getting the same impression from, as the employer is by meeting Jack at the exact same time that the employer is meeting him, which is really cool. It's kind of goofy. I mean, I don't know how keen I'd be on driving a 3.5 hour one-way trip to do an interview, but I guess it's for a job that's going to last months and months, and something that he can use to hopefully write his novel or whatever. So instantly we get a sense that, I mean, already that Jack is kind of, I don't know if the employer and the guy in the interview gets the sense of Jack being kind of goofy or off at this point. I guess it's hard to see this movie for the first time, at this late stage of the game. You just kind of delight at, even in the interview scene, Jack Nicholson's kind of goofy performance as Jack Torrance, of course, doing his best, the character doing his best to, seem likable and genuine and stuff. But I think one gets a sense of, there being more to this character that he leads on in the interview, and it's exactly what we end up finding out later. At the trying, of course, I don't plan to do a beat by beat of this movie, but as you know, when I love a movie, it's kind of hard for me to do that. So then the next scene, we're introduced to his wife and his son Danny. It's interesting that I think the two male leads in this movie, Jack and Danny in the movie, I think their real first names are Jack and Danny. I mean, I know Jack Nicholson's real first name is Jack, but I think Danny was also played by Danny Lloyd, which is kind of an interesting thing. It's too bad, Shelley Duvall's character wasn't Shelley, but that would have made, everything perfect. But so the next scene, or one of the next scenes, we're introduced to his son, and his son's got an imaginary friend named Tony, who's like, a finger always comes up and goes like this when he talks. Well, we find out very early on that Tony is more, and this is a great bit of storytelling on Stanley Kubrick's part, Tony is more than just a freaking imaginary friend. This is some actual entity or something that is real, because Tony basically predicts two factual things that happen in the real world, being his dad getting the job as caretaker of the Overlook Hotel, and the fact that he's going to call home in a few moments to let his wife know that. So at that point, we actually are very early on, not long after we're introduced to Tony, the imaginary friend, we get a little insight into, this is not just a plaything, this is something real that's going on, which instantly, and this happens early on in the movie, I don't probably have to say because everyone's probably seen this movie, but that's instantly something that is very, very scary. And Tony shows him while Danny is trying to brush his teeth or whatever, Tony shows him scary images from the Overlook Hotel, and kind of some past, some future, some of him screaming later on in his winter visit or winter stay, his partial stay with his family at the Overlook Hotel, and he basically blacks out and he wakes up with this nurse woman who visits the apartment to look after him or look over him and stuff. And it's this scene where it's kind of, we start the movie with the Jack Torrance interview, and the next couple scenes, this is a scene where we kind of have a Wendy, that's Jack Nicholson's wife in this movie, a Wendy interview where she's kind of asked a few questions by this nurse/doctor person about Danny and what happened to. We actually accidentally kind of get along on the subject that we see we find out some of the not so pleasant things about the side of Jack, which him being a potential alcoholic and abusing his son, and pulling his son up off the floor hard enough to dislocate his arm. And so and it's kind of interesting because in the Wendy interview we learn obviously more of the not so nice things about Jack that he probably wouldn't admit to himself, and it's just accidental how she kind of mentions that Danny injured his arm, and then the woman, nurse/doctor woman, is kind of presses on, and what happened? He dislocated his shoulder. How did he do that? And she just Wendy keeps feeling like she has to. I don't know if it's realistic that a woman would admit that. Probably not, but the way she does it is kind of realistic, where she just kind of is defending Jack and saying, just purely an accident. It's just kind of things you do 1,000 times with a child, in the park or in the streets. He just, in this particular occasion, he used too much strength and injured his arm. And I love when he cut back to the woman's expression, just like, just blank kind of concerned expression. But anyway, I got to stop doing the beat by beat at this point. At the end of the day, obviously this is a beyond 4-star movie for me. It's a Stanley Kubrick movie. it's his only kind of, I guess, it's funny because at this time, obviously a couple of years after Halloween really kind of started the trend, if you will, of horror movies. And it's funny that Stanley Kubrick kind of course, I don't know, it's just it's fair to say that he was developing this movie probably, potentially before Halloween came out. But it's interesting how at the same time there was all this exploding of kind of, horror movies and slashers at the late 70s, early 80s that, the great Stanley Kubrick would do his own take on a kind of a horror movie, not necessarily slasher. I mean, although it's got like brief slasher elements, it's his Stanley Kubrick's take on a horror movie, and it's interesting that this came out the same year as Friday the 13th, and if I'm not mistaken, it's kind of a shame, although being a Friday the 13th fanatic and not a maniac, I'm not too sad about the fact that if memory serves, Friday the 13th, from what they say, ended up doing better business than The Shining, which is something that I kind of feel bad and then not bad at the same time about, because I love Friday the 13th as well. Obviously, The Shining is a much superior film to Friday the 13th, but maybe people just weren't interested necessarily in an epic horror movie, and something that, obviously The Shining isn't a body count movie. It's a work of art with, certain kind of, contemporary at the time slasher elements. It's definitely not a slasher movie, but it goes there briefly for, a very limited amount of time where Jack kills someone with an axe. But it's obviously this is an absolute, fantastic favorite of mine. Stanley Kubrick movie, and I don't think I necessarily give every Stanley Kubrick movie 4 stars. I'm not the biggest fan of Lolita in the world, so I'd say the majority of his movies for me though would be 4 stars. Come on. One of the things I find kind of strange about this movie is the hedge maze element of the movie. Like on the aerial shots of the Overlook Hotel, which is an actual place that they photograph, Stanley sent someone over to shoot this footage, him staying in England probably, most likely. I don't know exactly how they explain the fact that in the aerial footage of the Overlook Hotel, there's no hedge maze to be found. I don't know. One could say that's extreme incompetence on Stanley Kubrick's part. But right away at the beginning of the movie, we get this kind of high-angle aerial shot of the Overlook Hotel, and from what I can see, there's no hedge maze anywhere to be seen. And later on, obviously, the exteriors of the Overlook Hotel and the outside of the hedge maze that you do see is obviously something that was constructed over in England where they shot the movie. And you can see that the hedge maze is very, very, very close to the hotel itself. And when I just recently rewatched it, I'm like, oh, well, maybe it's in the, supposed to be behind the hotel. Well, the shot of the Overlook Hotel is such a high-angle shot from the air that you'd be able to see it even if it was supposed to be behind the hotel. So that's kind of something that's kind of a really big screw-up if you want to look at it in those terms. And also something that was pointed out in the documentary Room 237 that I saw on YouTube for free years and years ago is the fact that they have about as much luggage when they actually go up for the winter stay at the Overlook Hotel. They bring in their VW Bug, more luggage than I think it's more luggage than the car is big, and it's just one of these, I don't know, obviously that's probably a deliberate choice, on the Stanley's, the deliberate choice to have a ridiculously absurd amount of luggage that would no way fit in the car. It's the pile of luggage on the floor that they have purported to have brought up with them for the winter stay is basically as big as if you were to park the VW Bug next to the pile of luggage, it's the same size, or maybe the pile of luggage is bigger, who knows. In the footage of them driving up to the Overlook Hotel, all 3 of them, they're not pulling a trailer, there's nothing on the roof, it's absolutely, so these things must have been done intentionally for some weird reason. And then, of course, the bit we have about, that dissolve of the pile of luggage dissolves to a group of people perfectly standing there in the next shot. potentially deliberate and all this kind of, I don't discredit a lot of the stuff that they mentioned on that documentary Room 237. I think that it's obviously known that a lot of subliminal stuff is put into media and entertainment and movies and stuff. So I mean, and also the undertones about this movie being basically, this hotel being built on an Indian burial ground and actually having to repel Indian attacks as they were building it, and this kind of sense of, this movie making a little bit of saying a little bit about the history, if what we're to understand about the history of the United States is actually true, about them coming over and killing and uprooting the indigenous population and kind of building the European whatever kind of civilization in this new land. If that, if what we're told about that is actually true, this movie says a little bit about that as well, just in the details about the Overlook Hotel and being built on an Indian burial ground itself, and those kind of things are also mentioned, of course, in the movie obviously as an undertone as well. To be honest, for me, one of the scariest things about this movie, having grown up, unfortunately, with parents that argued and then ended up in a divorce situation, being a child of divorce, or having experienced that right around the same time as, probably the same age as Danny is in this movie. One of the scariest things to me in this movie is the sense of just a parent figure becoming unhinged. When you're a kid, I mean, your two parents are pretty much, in a way, your life. Well, not in a way. I mean, in all forms and senses of the word or whatever. They're basically your lifeline and your security blanket and your only way of survival when you're a kid. Certainly when you're, under 10 or right around 10, and that age range. I don't know exactly how old Danny's supposed to be in this movie, but somewhere around there, And that's one of the scariest things about this movie for me, and it's not so much about a haunted hotel as much as it is just the scariness about one of your own parents turning so goofy in a way that actually want to cause you harm or even death is one of the scariest things in this movie. But having said that, I mean, obviously the supernatural kind of elements about this movie is really scary as well. And what I should mention that plays a huge, to me, this is one of the most scary movies I've ever seen, and I've just rewatched it within the last week, and it still is that. And I think the reason for me that it is so scary is just probably the biggest thing for me that makes this movie scary is actually just the use of the music. The use of the music in this movie is absolutely profound and absolutely perfect, and it really is what I think makes this movie, is the biggest component for me and what makes this movie scary. Also, something that I've understood ever since probably I saw this movie when I was 12 is something that really scares me in movies is when you have characters, and it happens several times in this movie, when you have characters that have an expression on their face that is so genuinely, like if you see someone in a movie who's just got a really unsettling expression on their face, which is basically what that guy does in his bed when he's getting shining about the events, potentially happening that winter when he's in Florida, the head cook or whatever, I can't remember his name right now, but the absolutely fantastic actor who plays, the cook, the guy who ends up going up to, end up getting axed or whatever. That shot of him, becoming kind of trance-like state with his eyes open and his mouth open, just staring off into a void, is probably one of the most scary images I've ever seen in a movie. And then compiled with obviously the music that's going on at the time, and just the subtle way. It's strange how this movie's so subtle, but to me it's got some of the most scary images and sounds out of any movie I've ever seen. It absolutely, like, if I watch it in a dark room by myself, it's really, holy crap, it really gets to you, So hats off to Stanley Kubrick for just, really, it's like anything he tackles, he will, he will succeed at better than pretty much anyone else can do. But just the subtle use of just a slow zoom in and this guy's expression and the music, and oh my gosh, it can be a really scary movie. Talking about that, the head cook character in the movie, it is unfortunate. One of the strikes I give against this movie, it is unfortunate that like so many times in mainstream, whatever, mainstream anything, but a movie, in this case a movie, it's unfortunate that this whole race card has to be perpetuated, and in my opinion, this whole race shit that exists in the world only exists because of media in the first place. And if they would just stop, I mean, it's deliberate, but if they would just stop fucking talking about it and stuff like that, it wouldn't have existed in the first place. But if you just leave it alone and let it go, it would disappear, I would think, over generations. But of course, that's not the plan. But that's one of the things that, as I get older, that's more and more frustrating about this movie is the whole race thing. I mean, there's really no point to it. I could have maybe understood it more if he was an Indian, like a Native American Indian or whatever. But having it be a black guy and just bringing like the race card into it and having the kind of the cliched black chef or head chef or whatever the hell, it's just that's an element that as I get older I appreciate. Less and less. Not that I ever appreciated it, whatever. It's just, obviously for me it was just completely uninteresting. I mean, you can have I'm fine obviously with the black character, but then it's like, oh, you're, at first when you watch a movie you're like, oh, cool, black character or whatever. You don't think anything of it, but then later on, the fucking race thing has to come into it where it's just that's something that is not appreciated by me. So what can I say? Absolutely fantastic movie. I love how as the weeks, I don't know, I can't remember, it says it on the screen or whatever, I can't remember exactly how long they spend. I don't know if they tell you exactly how long they spend, like how much time is spent there before like the final night or whatever. I don't know how long, if they just, maybe they only spend like a month there or 2 months, I don't know. I'm so engaged in the movie every time I watch it, I don't necessarily pay attention to the title cards that come up and say, what time a month or how many weeks, whatever. But, all this stuff kind of goes bad probably relatively quickly, and it's interesting seeing the Stanley Kubrick's absolutely masterly handling the gradual kind of decay or degradation, the decay of Jack Torrance's mental state. And I think a month later he's already sleeping till like noon, and he's just like, he's got this book he wants to try to write, and this very slow basically mental deterioration of Jack's character. And we're trying to write this book, and again, it's unsettling when Wendy comes down when he's typing, and this is the first scene of him being really starting to go, where he kind of tells her off for disturbing him, and you just feel for the wife in this scene. It's just like, oh man. And it's particularly scary, them being trapped in this desolate location with, being trapped together with this guy, and what happens if this guy goes nuts, and it's a kind of a cool, slow build. Obviously the tension rises slowly and continues to rise as the movie goes on, but it's a really, really strange and unsettling situation as the movie wears on, and you can see him deteriorate. And not long after the snowstorm and Wendy and Danny are outside playing in the snow, that fantastic shot of Jack Nicholson where he's just absolutely descending into the depths of whatever insanity that frickin', I'd love to see like all the takes of that shot of Jack Nicholson just standing in front of the window, kind of just like this crazed look on his face. You almost think it's a still that they zoom into, but it's not. You can see him move and his face move or whatever, and I just love to see it. How many times I'd love to see every take of that, and every 400 takes of it, and the outtakes and him breaking up and laughing. Oh, it'd be so fun to see, more, to see all the takes of that shot. I mean, I could go on and on about this movie. This is kind of why I didn't bother reviewing any Stanley Kubrick movies up until this point, because you almost want to just do a commentary and just talk about, just to do a review as long as the movie, because there's almost that much or more to say about it. But absolutely fantastic on so many fronts. Visually, music, written, the screenplay, and it's just like, oh my gosh, one of my only complaints with to go along with the kind of needless race bullshit that they bring into this movie is when all hell's breaking loose and Jack actually finally goes nuts at the end, and he chases Danny out into the hedge maze. One of my only complaints is, I don't know, the necessity to feel like, well, what do we do with Wendy during all this stuff? And it's kind of like, that's kind of like one of the weakest points of the movie for me, is when Jack is chasing Danny and then Wendy gets all these kind of her own little separate haunted house ride or experience, where she goes into several different parts of the hotel and sees weird stuff and scary stuff. And I feel like that's just kind of, I don't know, maybe Kubrick's just way of like, I don't know, doing a little nod to horror movies or whatever. I mean, even so much so as to almost do like a 1950s spooky movie thing where it's just a room full of cobwebs and skeletons and sitting in chairs and stuff like that. Not too sure that I'd say that at this point in my life is the weakest part of the movie, where she just goes and sees all kinds of weird things and hauntings, if you will. Because up until that point, I mean, something I didn't mention in this review is that Danny, along with the head cook of the Overlook Hotel, they have this thing, that's what the movie is called. I didn't even mention it. The movie is called The Shining, and The Shining is this ability to kind of the extrasensory perception or something, the ability to just being more sensitive to potential energies or whatever, and being able to tell if you see the past or tell the future with this ability to just sense stuff. And then that's what Jack and Wendy's son Danny has in this movie. So this ability that Danny has is the reason that makes sense for him to experience all these, really unsettling things about the, things that have happened in the past at this hotel. And another thing that I didn't mention, well, the reason I don't feel like I need to mention certain points about this movie is because I imagine everyone's seen it. But in closing, another thing that is a key point about this movie is that this, unfortunate thing had happened a year prior, or 10 years prior, where another caretaker had brought his family up and went nuts over the course of the winter and killed his two daughters and his wife, and then blew his head off. So the movie's basically about, Danny, 10 years later, Danny's character picking up on, all kinds of that, including, all kinds of who knows how many bad things that happened in the hotel over the years, and not to mention that the place is built on an Indian burial ground, just contribute to the place being just a really, spirit, for the purposes of the movie, a negatively, spiritually, whatever, charged, haunted place. And that's why it makes more sense that Danny experiences all the creepy things. So then when Wendy's towards the end of the movie experiencing all these hauntings and stuff, it kind of seems like a cheat, or doesn't make sense to me, because we've never been told that she's got the Shining or anything like that. But that's why that whole element, or the whole point of that, or the whole bit of that movie where Wendy sees all these haunting, spooky things, in my opinion, is kind of like, it's just there to kind of, it's just, I don't know, we'll just leave it at that I believe that, in my opinion, having just rewatched this lately, within the last week, at this point, that's my biggest problem with the movie, and what I regard as its weakest point is just her seeing all these spooky things. And it should be said that when I was 12, and even still, not so much now, but when I was 12, that shot of like her seeing that stuffed, or not stuffed, but this person wearing a costume with like the butt sticking out of the back, and on the bed, and then them sitting up, and it's being like a guy and this person in a costume, I guess we're supposed to think it's a girl or whatever, sits up, and it like just these quick zoom-ins into the stuff, and the guy just has this expression. Obviously you can tell it's a British guy, and so many faces in this movie are just British faces, like the young girl in the tub and all this stuff. And I mean, this is why I never tried reviewing a Stanley Kubrick movie. There's so many things that I could say, and obviously one of the creepiest parts, nastiest things in all of movies that I've seen is what happens with the girl in the tub scene, and turns into an old woman. Whenever I watch it, I just like I don't watch the old naked rotting woman scene. I mean, I can't do that anymore. So I mean, that's pretty much, I don't know, I guess my attempt at reviewing The Shining. I mean, at this point, this review's like 30 minutes long, and it's just like, oh my gosh, I probably could have done better. I don't know. So I guess that's pretty much all I have to say about The Shining at this point anyway. Absolutely fantastic movie, as you can tell. I mean, I can go on and on and on and on and on about The Shining. And in closing, one of my other gripes with the movie, of course, being someone who lives in the Midwest, is with the ending, and the chase in the supposed to be frigidly cold, snowed out, hedge maze that's all snowy and stuff. I mean, I don't think there's one instance where, Jack or Danny in that scene exhibit any signs of breath, which, for a Stanley Kubrick movie, he usually has everything, bases covered and things taken care of that you necessarily wouldn't even thought of. And it's just, I don't know, that's just one of the other things, in addition to the hedge maze clearly not being anywhere around the hotel, and the aerial shots just is big, and also the ridiculous amount of luggage. I think that luggage thing was more of a kind of a just, I don't know what the hell that was. I think that was kind of deliberate, but the no breath thing is kind of what I would regard as a big screw up or whatever. But anyway, I've gone on way too long. An obvious beyond 4 stars for this absolutely phenomenal movie, The Shining, done by Stanley Kubrick's third to last film at this point in his life. I mean, the distances between movies are getting to be, almost, it's almost a decade between The Shining and his next movie, and then it's more than a decade, I think, between, his next movie and his last movie. So thank you very much for watching this review, and as always, we'll catch you next time.